and welcome to the Game Changers podcast, where you'll hear from trailblazing, fearless women in sport. I'm Sue Anstis, host of the Game Changers, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity, and the founder and CEO of Promote PR, one of Britain's leading sports PR agencies. In this episode, you'll hear from Jo Adams, England Netball's CEO. Jo recently announced her departure from the sport after 9 incredible years and is off to take on a new challenge as Chief Commercial Officer at the London Legacy Development Corporation. It's always a pleasure for me to head back to Loughborough University, and that's where I met with Jo in the England Netball office at Loughborough's Sports Park. I started the interview by asking Jo if sport had always been a part of her life growing up.
No, actually you'd be surprised. I didn't really come from that sporty family. My grandparents loved sports and my nanny loved cricket. My grandfather loved football, but my parents weren't sporty people, nor did they watch sport. But I was absolutely fascinated by sport for as long as I can remember, and probably not so much competing, but watching it or reading about it. So
that's interesting. Why do you think that was then? Why do you think that interest in sport came from your side?
Do you know, it's really weird. It's like it was the passion that I saw people doing sport with, and I love anybody who is a passionate person. So I think maybe that sparked an interest. The competitiveness, I loved just watching or reading about that. And then as I got older, it very much was the impact that sport can have on people and how it can change people. And it was just all those sorts of bits that came together, really. But from a really young age, so when girlfriends of mine were out still doing stuff, I would be watching. I would sit and watch the FA Cup final, at the time. Yeah. I'm quite old now, aren't I, really? But at the time, there wasn't a huge amount of sport on. But I'd always read a newspaper from the back pages. It was just, I was fascinated by it, not just participating. I was fascinated by it.
Yeah. And did you play sport very much as a girl?
Well, I was sporty at school. I was really quite sporty at school. I was quite a good runner. So I liked sprinting. I wasn't a distance runner. And then hockey was the game that I played at school. So I enjoyed playing hockey. I was a left inner, so again, giving my age away a little bit there. But I never did anything to any sort of great standard. I loved sport, loved participating, but I was the average kid. I was nothing special at all.
And do you remember, in terms of, I guess we talk a lot about role models and those kind of women out there making an impression, are there any female women in sport that you remember growing up that made an impression on you?
It's strange because I just can't remember really watching many women participate in sport. I think the only thing I can really remember was Wimbledon, Solar Bud. I always remember Solar Bud. But other than that, really, 40 odd years ago, there just weren't women that you could see you didn't see much sport anyway on TV, but there just weren't women, iconic sporting figures in those days. They were very few and far between. So I don't ever remember somebody like that having an impact on me. For me, it was more business women that I found fascinating. Those were more the sorts of people that I think shaped how I thought. I was a massive Vivienne Westwood fan. I absolutely idolised the woman from being quite young. So it was people like that I was fascinated in, probably because they were much more visible to me than sportswomen.
And I guess you've become one of the most successful women in sport, I think, at the moment, you would definitely say. Can you remember when you were growing up, you've mentioned Vivienne Westwood there, what did you feel that you wanted to do? I guess people that might be coming into sport now, or women in the sports sector looking at their own route.
Yeah, I had a very strange route. So I didn't go to university, for starters. People are normally shocked because they would assume I did a sports management degree or something. At 16, I went to live in central London and trained to be a fashion buyer. And the only reason I did that was because it was the only grant you could get at 16, and I desperately wanted to live in London. So I trained to be a fashion buyer, did that for 2 years. Basically didn't come from a fashion-based family, so couldn't afford to stay in London. Went home, I set up my own business supported by the Prince's Trust.
How old were you then?
18.
Wow.
Yeah, did that for a couple of years and then realised I had absolutely no business acumen at all. So I got a job working for a marketing company, and that's kind of where it all started. So I started off working for Pirelli tyres, did quite a bit in motor racing, that sort of thing.
In marketing?
In marketing, yeah, absolutely. And then I went and worked, believe it or not, for a metal perforating company as marketing manager, sorry. So I was quite young, 23, and I just thought, what on earth do I love doing? And I loved doing the marketing bit, but I always loved the commercial bit. I loved doing a deal. I loved making a difference to the bottom line. So I kind of stayed in that sort of role, was a mum working, had my second child, and thought, if I'm not going to spend time with my children, I want to do something I love. And sport was always this thing that I loved. You know, I was really weird about watching sport and reading about sport when lots of women at the time just weren't.
And you talked earlier about watching the FA Cup and football. So your kind of first intro into the sports sector, how did you come into the sports sector?
So after I had my second child, I decided to look for a job in sport. And I kind of looked at lived in Nottingham, looked at Nottingham Forest, Notts County. You just couldn't get into places like that unless you had a sports background. But Empix at the time was the second biggest sports photography company in the world. And they were in Nottingham and they were looking for someone to go in as commercial manager. So you didn't necessarily have to have a sporting background. And that's where it all started. So I worked for the newspapers all around the world, delivering images to them. And then asked Phil O'Brien, the guy at the time who owned the business, whether or not we could go off and look at selling to rights holders, selling to brands, and looking at that whole different market. And I was really fortunate that they let me have a go at doing it, and that's what absolutely kickstarted my dream job world in sport. Yeah.
Were there other times you sort of doubted you could reach those heights because you were a woman? Did you ever feel that was something that held you back at all?
It's really funny for me. I've never ever thought that my sex would hold me back. I think even when I was young, I either wanted to run a business or own my own business. That was always my dream, and I never ever felt my sex held me back. And you know, later in my career, I was at the football conference, which was completely male dominated. I sat on a board of 11 chairmen of football clubs. The CEO at the time was a man. I was literally the only woman in that environment. It never ever bothered me. Never bothered me. There was a lot of banter. It wasn't offensive banter. You know, I never found it difficult. What I find interesting now is as I've got older and I see how young women are sometimes treated, I find it incredibly offensive. And I want to stop it, but my own career, I never felt it, and it never affected me.
Do you think you didn't see it then at the time? Because I'm similar to you, I look back and I don't feel I was aware of it, but do you think it wasn't there, or society was different and you were more accepting of the way in which you were treated?
Yeah, I think it was definitely there. I mean, if I look now at some of the things that were said to me in jest, I didn't take it as offensive. I probably should have actually taken it as offensive, but I just didn't find it offensive. If somebody said some of the things that were said to me to one of the young women that might work for me, I would be absolutely furious, like completely furious. So I don't know whether it was just we were expected to accept it, or whether I gave back as good as I got. You know, I just think I'm one of those people that if something's said, I'll give back as good as I got, and I don't think it ever held me back. I think more recently, surprisingly, my sex has held me back in my career for the sort of, you know, some of the other jobs that I would have loved to have had. I truly believe my sex holds me back now more than it ever did when I was young.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that later on in terms of where do you feel we are now within the world of sport? Are there specific jobs that you think women now wouldn't have the opportunity to have a kind of decent run at, as it were?
Well, have a look at the big sports in this country, how many women run them, how many women make those long lists to even have a shot at some of those jobs. I can be outspoken now because I'm leaving netball and I probably would never have a shot at those again. But I truly don't believe women do have a shot at those. You know, I think at this moment in time, I'm running one of the most successful sports in this country. My name wouldn't have appeared on any of those lists. Yeah. And that, I think, is still quite shocking.
Do you think that will change, and what will need to happen in order for that change? I don't disagree with you at all.
I'm a great believer in you've got to see it to be it. Somebody sooner or later has got to get rid of the old boys club, and it still does exist. You know, it absolutely does exist in sport, and it's the people that place those people in those roles. Something has to change because it's not changing, and I think some of those roles, you know, it's got actually more difficult for women than it's been previously. So, whether it's the recruiters have to go further afield and work a little bit harder than potentially they currently work to fill those roles, or it is just breaking down those barriers. It should be the person who's
best for the job,
who's the best for the job. And if it's a woman that isn't the best for the job, then that's fine. But you've got to give us a shot at them. And that, I feel like it still doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about, I guess, time in football. And that's interesting, you're feeling that you didn't experience that. I was going to ask you more around how you kind of overcame walking into a room and being the only female in a room, and advice you'd give to other women in that situation now. But I guess you had that confidence just to go and be yourself on the skills and talent that you had at the time.
It's an external confidence. Don't get me wrong, I'd walk into a room and I'd be absolutely shaking and terribly nervous. I remember going to the league managers dinner, probably, goodness me, how many years ago? 15, probably more years ago. And literally there were 300 odd men and probably me and one other woman. That is really daunting. So you don't let anybody see that you're nervous, but that nervousness is there. It's not a pleasant experience. It wouldn't be pleasant for a man walking into a room of 300 women. It's, you are the person that stands out. But I think you're exactly right. I think you have to put on a front of that you are very confident, and you have to absolutely know your stuff. That's the difference. It's having absolute belief in you know exactly what you're talking about, and you're as good as anybody else in that room, and you shouldn't be put off for the fact that you are the only woman. Sometimes maybe we need to know our stuff a bit more than men. I think sometimes I had to overly prove myself. But again, it's a good skill to take into life, because I still now will never go into a meeting where I'm not absolutely 100% prepared for that. And that's probably a good thing that came through my career. I had to do that when I was younger, and now it's just matter of course. So I don't ever go into a situation where I don't feel confident and prepared for it. But I think young women now, they've just got to be confident in their self-belief. And then I think women who are more senior really have to help them. They really have to help them, And I like to think that here we have great opportunities for young women to progress, but they see a false senior leadership team. So I talk to the younger women that work for us, and they just don't even see it. In their mindset, there isn't even a mindset that they couldn't get to the top, because that's all they see. So
that's almost in that fantastic bubble that's been created here almost until they step outside into the wider world of sport. And I guess when you came, you've been here in the role for over 9 years now in terms of a commercial women CEO. What was it about netball that attracted you in the first place?
Well, the fact I love the business of sport. I absolutely love it, and I love a challenge. I love something that's a turnaround. When I went to the football conference, that needed a new identity, it needed new sponsors, it needed a broadcast deal, they were reshaping the league, it needed a bit of a kick. And I felt the same about netball. For me, it was an untapped gem. It was just this wonderful sport that so many women loved, but only the women that played it knew anything about it. So for me, it was a challenge around turning a business around. It happened to be a sports business, but that's what I love. It's the turnaround piece for me.
I do feel it's in a completely different place now to where it was when you came in terms of accessibility and visibility, and I guess the sponsorship and funding and broadcast. So when you came in, what were the main priorities that you felt at that time as you came into this environment?
Going from an all-male environment coming into this, one of the priorities was like, wow, how do I change my headspace to now be working with lots of women? Which, again, people have asked me, oh, is it bitchy, is it catty? It's the most beautiful environment I have ever worked in. It's nurturing, it's fabulous. So that didn't need to change. There wasn't a culture piece here, which actually I thought there might have been. For me, the biggest thing was to change the perception of the sport. That was the thing I worked really hard with straight away, because unless you change the perception and it had a new look and feel around being a different brand, then you were never going to change anything. And actually a lot of the stuff we were doing around participation was really good. It's just that the perception of the sport was wrong. So that was the first thing we did. We looked at what the sport looked like from an external point of view, and we tried to change that. And I think, this girl Candace uses the real people. Dove did it before us. But that's what we did. We took real people and we took them outside of a leisure centre environment. We took bibs off, and it was very much about what people talked about their feelings around the sport. We changed the perception of how the sport was seen. And once you did that, You could reposition the product, you could reposition the international, you could reposition the Super League. All that started to follow. And the other major thing we did was putting the customer at the heart of everything we did. So we took traditional business principles about having a great brand, understanding your customer and providing them with the right product. And that's what we've done really well. It just happens to be that it's netball.
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly, huge pressure and stress come with any role as a CEO of an NGB. Has that been a challenge for you?
It is. It's very challenging. Anybody takes on a CEO role at an NGB, these are massive jobs. It doesn't matter about the salary. Take the salary out of it because none of us are going to make a lot of money doing this job. But it is a huge job. And you actually kind of run 3 different businesses. You run a business that generates participation, which is very different from the business of creating elite athletes and a talent pathway. And then you also run an out-and-out commercial events business. And it's making sure that the 3 of those come together and they don't actually drive a wedge between each bit of the business. So it's actually a very complex business. It is very stressful, but for me, and I've said this before, it's an absolute privilege to run a governing body. I think it's a privilege to work in sport, but to run a governing body is an absolute privilege. And you do have the stress that goes with it. It's 24/7. And the other bit is the majority of your workforce is uncontrollable because it's volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to bring those volunteers with you. You can't isolate them. They have to love what you're doing as much as you love and respect them for, they are the roots of your sport. You can't live without those people.
They're often challenging and vocal, and obviously you're the head, the face of a sport, as it were. So I guess how have you dealt with that in terms of, do you ever feel a bit isolated in that way as a head of this sport?
I think any CEO feels isolated because you can't really talk to the rest of the people in your business. I've tended to find other like-minded CEOs and share with them, but you do sometimes feel isolated, and you're also making decisions about things that people are so incredibly passionate about. It's not like if you make water bottles and somebody doesn't particularly like your water bottle. This is something that people give up their lives to do. Yeah, absolutely. So you feel hugely responsible, and sometimes you make decisions and people do not like it, and they are very verbal about that. And with social media, they can attack you. And I have been, I've been attacked quite a bit on social media, but you just have to accept it. You have to accept that decisions you make, some people will not like, and I don't find it offensive. They're just stating their opinion. And the only thing I'd say is that every decision you make as a CEO, you do it in the best interest of your business. You don't do it for personal gain. You do it because you feel it's the right thing to do for your business, and you've been put in that position to ultimately make those decisions. If sometimes you make the wrong decision, you haven't done it to hurt individuals within the sport. That's not why you make decisions. But I think a poor CEO is somebody that doesn't make those difficult decisions. That's when I think you're not doing your job right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess on a more positive side, what elements of being a CEO across this time have you loved the most? What are the bits that really thrill you, that excite you?
Oh my God, I love every single bit of it. I can't deny, I might be a bit of an egomaniac. I love the fact that ultimately it's my responsibility. I absolutely love that. I thrive on the pressure of that. I love it. The bits that have just been amazing about this job, oh my God, they're just, there's too many. The bit that I think we're so proud of is the number of people that now play the sport. Love that. Love the fact that we held a home World Cup. Unbelievable. Commonwealth Games gold. Unbelievable. I think the thing that's thrilled me the most, and people are going to say, oh, she's just saying this, is to actually see the people that have worked in this industry grow and develop. That, to me, again, if you're a CEO, you've got to have people around you that love what they're doing. You are only as good as the people who follow the strategy and the vision that you've helped to create. Yeah. And to see some of the men and women that work here even go on to bigger and better jobs, that is just, it's a really wonderful feeling. But there've been even the bad bits. They just haven't been bad bits. It's been such an honour to have this role, an absolute honour.
And I think you mentioned there, we can't really talk to you to not talk about Commonwealth Gold and on to the World Cup as well. From that that point of view of your being there as CEO, I was always interested to know how it felt for you courtside, I guess, in that those final moments, and also in the semi-final against that goal at Jamaica. So how did you feel? Because obviously by that time your work is done almost. So you're not Tracy and the coaches courtside. You're not there. You're sat in the crowd. How did that feel for you being there?
It is the most emotionally draining thing you'll ever go through in your life, because you're right. Your job is to make sure they've got the funding, to put in the right head coach, to check and challenge the performance director to make sure that the programme and the pathway and everything that's around those elite athletes is right. And once you've done that, you can do no more. You can't affect those games. And sitting through that Jamaica match, I'm quite loud when I watch sport. I sat with my head in my hands through the whole game because it was just relief. It was because all we wanted to do was make it to that final. And it was just absolute relief that we'd finally done it, that all that hard work and the battling for the money and, difficult decisions and the things that people don't see, the fights that you have and the battles that you have, it worked. The plan came off. It was amazing. The final, it's funny, I went into that final knowing we would win. I honestly thought we've got this. We have got this, because it was getting through that semi-final. And you watch it in so many different ways. You watch it as a sports fan, but you watch it and think, wow, this could really affect us going forward. And you think about the other sponsors it might bring in. You think about renegotiating the broadcast deal, and you're going to be in a different place. You think about how it's going to affect participation. And it's just the most incredible feeling. I can't explain it. I think it's maybe when somebody's been a professional athlete and they're then a manager, and they always get asked, don't they, would you prefer to be the athlete or the manager? And they always say, oh my God, managing that team was the best thing ever. I can't put into words. It's just the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. It will never be beaten in my career. I never had anything as good as it before, and I will never ever have anything as good as it again. I know that. Some people say you might. I will never ever have that moment again. It was just incredible.
That's extraordinary to hear, isn't it? And I guess then on to the World Cup this summer and hosting that must have been a real, there's a lot of risks taking on an event of that kind on home soil.
Yeah, I mean, we bid for that and we won that back in 2014. So we bid for it in 2013. So actually it's been a 6-year journey to finally get to the World Cup. And England Netball were very brave to take it on, because you do underwrite it. You have your partners, UK Sport, ACC Liverpool and Liverpool City Council, so they help you fund it, but it's a massive risk to the governing body. And it was 2 years properly in the planning. Again, incredible team that sat behind it, that put that team on. Amazing board that we had. So we had a different board. The England Netball board is amazing, but we had a separate, much smaller, much more agile board for the Netball World Cup. And it's hard work, difficult decisions, getting everything in place. But wow, when you walk into that stadium and see it branded up, myself and Lindsay Impett, the event director, who just did the most extraordinary job, we both shed a tear. We literally walked into that arena, we were like, wow, it's here. We didn't get the medal we wanted. Obviously, we desperately wanted to get to the final.
But you could not have asked for more exciting final, semi-final, playoffs. I mean, everything was almost, as they couldn't have been written better in terms of the story of those games.
It couldn't have, absolutely. And the important thing for us, because, I wore 2 hats. I wore the England Netball hat about us wanting to get to that final, but I wore a Netball World Cup hat, and that was about putting on an incredible event where everybody, go back to that very first point, that perception of netball. This was our chance to radically change the perception of netball, more than the Commonwealth Games, I think, because most people just watch that final. That's what they remember from the Commonwealth Games. This was an opportunity for people to watch netball and get involved in a World Cup. And that's the thing that brought us most pleasure. We changed that perception. We wanted to sell 60,000 tickets. We sold 110,000. We had it on the BBC. The media coverage was just extraordinary. And post that, the amount of participation, it's grown again. And we didn't think it could grow after the Commonwealth Games. So again, I keep saying this, don't I? Wonderful experiences. Just a wonderful experience.
I think for me, it's when I came in, it was the weekend, I guess it was only on Sky that first weekend. Like, my husband's a netball fan, we've got 3 daughters that play, but he had the iPad in the kitchen, he was doing some cooking stuff, and he said, it's just so addictive, isn't it? And he'd gone from game to game to game that whole weekend. So that was, for me, it's like, yeah, it is that whole once you're hooked into it or to watch more. You know, some people do say that, question that power of major events to drive that grassroots legacy and participation. What do you say to that, if there is that criticism?
It's ridiculous criticism. The only time it's not ridiculous criticism, and this is why netball has been successful, is if you have the right offer for your customer. And the thing that's different is people watch netball on TV and they thought, I want to give it a go. It's easy to give netball a go. One, we opened up we had 500 more sessions running that week following it, so anybody could get to go along. But it's the offer that's right. So you can go to a back to netball session. Where other sports potentially fail is that you have to go and sign up for a club and you have to train and play. That barrier is too big. The entry point has to be low. And so we've got back to netball and walking netball, and we developed those before Com Games and before this World Cup. So we knew we had a great product that if people saw it, they could go along and just have a go. Non-competitive, real laugh, just about being with friends. And that's why our participation has grown and why elite events can have a massive impact. It won't have a massive impact if
organically you need to put something in place.
Exactly. And people won't naturally go to a club and invest a lot of money and pay their membership fees. That just isn't how it works. You have to have an offer where the entry point is absolutely minimal.
Excellent, that's fantastic. Fantastic advice for other sports and NGBs too. Obviously, we talked a little bit about sponsorship and broadcast opportunities that you brought in. Why do you think that was so key for you at the time for the sport to get more funding in?
Well, 2 things. I mean, the funding, we are still predominantly funded by Sport England, which is just, their support of us has been absolutely magnificent. But we've always been very vocal that we want to make that switch. So we were 64% government funded, 36% our own fund. We're about 50-50 and, we want to switch that even more. So the funding is so critical because it keeps frontline delivery staff out there. It means we can build a back office. We've got a marketing team, we've got a commercial team. It means we can build a sports business, and that's really important. You can't, we don't want to rely on those few moments every 4 years where we peak and then we review our funding. We want to be football, cricket and rugby. We want the destiny of the sport to be in our own hands. So funding, really important. The commercial model around us, that's why we brought in the Quad Series, so that we have regular international...
Did you initiate the Quad Series? Yeah. I probably should have known that, shouldn't I?
That's right. Yeah, we did. We've just finished our 4th year. Yeah. So myself with Australia, New Zealand, they're not the CEOs that are currently in place, but the 2 previous to them, and the CEO of South Africa, we got together and said, let's create something like 6 Nations. That's what we needed. We also needed it from a performance point of view, because when we went into Glasgow, we hadn't played Australia for 18 months. You can't beat somebody if you're not playing them. So it meant that we had regular competition against the best in the world, but it also meant that we could build a commercial international property and a point for fans to recognise every year and for broadcasters to get behind. So when I first started this job and I sat down in front of broadcasters or sponsors, and they were like, well, what have you got? I said, well, we'll play somebody in August. Don't know who, don't know the dates, but come on, sign a deal. Yeah. So we could sit down in front of broadcasters and say, this is our international calendar. And that's not genius. That's not us being clever. That's just what male sport has done for years and years and years. So it's about creating that events product that is a 4-year it has a 4-year life cycle to it, so that you could sit down in front of brands and sponsors. So that piece had to come before we could have those conversations. And then, yes, Sky have been an incredible supporter of ours. We managed to then dual broadcast with the BBC against some of the Quad Series. And that's how it's grown and developed. But it was a plan. It was a plan we wrote in 2012 with all these little bits in place, that everybody within the senior leadership team knew what they were striving to do, and they all knew that they couldn't do it without each other. So performance does not dominate this business. Normally a performance director is the kingpin. Yeah. Sarah Symington is incredible, but she is exactly the same as Frank Conley from a development point of view. Same as commercial, same as finance. Yeah. Nobody has one piece of this jigsaw that anybody thinks is more important than the others. And I think, again, that's why we've been really successful.
And have you met you can say this now, you're leaving, have you met all the goals you had for the sport in terms of the broadcast and sponsorship and so on? Are you where you hoped you might be 9 years ago when you came in?
We absolutely are, yeah. And please don't think that sounds big-headed, but that's not me. That's a group of people who've been incredibly dedicated. But we absolutely are, yeah. And we know what the next stage of our journey needs to look like. But yeah, we are at the commercial point we wanted to be at. We're at the point where we're going to renegotiate a broadcast deal, and we're in a good space, and we're talking to lots of broadcasts, and that was always the dream for us. We know where our participation levels were meant to be, and they're absolutely there. Our sponsorship numbers, yeah, we really are where we wanted to be. And it won't be me driving the next 10 years, but I've sat down with the exec team and we've penciled out what we want it to look like and where we need it to go. So we're very clear on what needs to be done over the next 10 years, and I think the majority of that is around fully professionalising the sport.
I was going to move on to that now in terms of, I guess your departure from netball has just been announced recently. So I guess an incredibly hard decision to make, but why now, as it were?
It was a really difficult decision to make. I mean, it has semi-broken my heart. It's been an incredible time, incredible people to work with. It's post the World Cup. It's kind of what comes next. But I'll be very honest, I was approached. So I wasn't job hunting. I was approached by a headhunter who said, Jo, I think this fit is absolutely right for you. And the more I investigated it, I just thought, wow, yeah, I like a challenge. There's a turnaround piece that needs to be done there. And it just kind of ticked all those boxes for me. And if you could turn the Olympic Park back into a real destination piece that drives elite sport, brings in revenue and drives participation, it's kind of what I love doing. Yeah. So the time just felt right for me to move on. I think if this opportunity hadn't have come up, I don't think I'd necessarily be out there job hunting.
Right.
So it was really an opportunity came up.
Right time. And people refer to your time at England Netball as transformational, and obviously that's a lovely legacy for you. But how do you think you'll look back on your time in 10, 15 years?
It's really funny because when you're in it, you don't see it. It's like I had so many lovely messages when the announcement came out, and I was like, oh, really? People think that's good. It's like you just don't see what impact you've had, I don't think, because you're so in it and just working on it every single day that you probably don't appreciate it. I think if anything, if I could change anything, not change anything, but the thing, I go back to what I'm most proud of. When I look back, what's the thing that I'd look back over this time? Is helping the growth of women's sport and how women are perceived in sport. Yeah. That's the bit for me that if I have any legacy, that would be it. I'd love that.
And do you feel that's very different now to when you came, partly through the work that you've done, but just generally across women's sport? Do you feel we're in a much better place now than we were even 5 years ago?
Definitely. I mean, apart from my negative piece around the bigger sports, the rest of it, absolutely. The things that we were fighting for 10 years ago are just taken for granted now. So, yeah, the way it's moved on has been incredible. And that's because so many organisations got together to drive this. Yourself included, Women in Sport, Women's Sports Trust, there was so many that all came together at one time, brought the NGBs with them. It was like just that moment, that alignment when everybody was working towards one goal. And it was so powerful. And to be the female sport in that journey it is just fantastic. And it is in a better place. Everybody says it's not. There's still,
it to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's still not quite there. But if you think how quickly this has happened, and I think you look back to male sport and actually how long it took male sport to get to this point, it took a lot longer really than we have, because we've only just started on our professional journey. So I think it's incredible and we should celebrate it. I think we need to stop going, oh, woe is us and all the rest of it. Celebrate it now and go, look how fantastic, the Lionesses, how fantastic was that? The Netball World Cup, we're all talking broadcast deals. 10 years ago, I can remember if we got in a national newspaper, even if it was 3 lines, I literally would send it to every board member and they'd be like, oh my God, we got... Now, it's the norm. It's the norm for us to be in that. It's the norm for us to be in lifestyle mags. I remember talking to Nike And they've been having these conversations for such a long time with Elle, and Elle was like, we can't put sportswomen on the front. That was one of the best-selling copies of Elle magazine. That's massive societal change in 10 years. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And you now look at, Netball World Cup, those young girls that went to watch that is normal for them now, forevermore. That is normal, that they can go and watch women play sport.
And I guess for me, it's always been about, it's not that it's not about sport, it's about how they then feel about themselves in other business and all the academics and other things they may take on in life too. You mentioned collaboration there, and I was, clearly we talk a lot about that within sport, and I think you've really been quite a driving force within the sports sector, both with other NGBs, as you alluded to earlier. But I was just going to mention in terms of hockey and cricket and team up and working together to get more spectators for those 3 World Cups and to get more schoolgirls playing team sport. Do you think because it was 3 female CEOs that collaboration was more likely?
I absolutely 100% believe that, without a shadow of a doubt. And a lot of credit goes to Ali Oliver as well from Youth Sport Trust, because she was part of bringing us all together. And I feel quite flattered that you said I'm the one that's driven collaboration. I think I jump in. I will collaborate. I don't know whether
it does need people to be
driven a lot of it. I've gone, I'll come with you on that journey. But Team Up was a great, and again, 3-4 years ago, unheard of really, that sports would work together. But I think probably Sally, Claire and I, we had fun along the way as well, but equally, we got it sorted quickly. We agreed on what it needed to deliver, and there was never egos. No, there was never one-upmanship of my sport needs to. It very much was. We have this incredible moment in time over 3 years where we have 3 female World Cups. We can't lose that. We just can't lose that. Probably the fact we were 3 women.
Excellent. In terms of, I guess, team sport for schoolgirls, just a word to that in terms of why you personally feel that that's important that we get more girls playing team sport.
So it is my passion. I'm very sad. This is the one bit probably of my job that I would have been working on really hard, and that's about to keep school sport on the curriculum. That physical literacy is viewed the same as maths and literacy, and I'm hoping that some way I can keep linked to that, because that for me, if that goes, not just team sport, but if sport completely goes from the curriculum, I honestly think we're screwed. We are just screwed, because it gives young people so many chances to do different things and learn new skills. And not everybody is great at maths and English and the sciences. Some people, they find their space and their confidence because they're doing sport or activity, physical activity. And some of the stats around this, you have children going to primary school now who can't sit up in a chair because they don't move enough. I mean, that's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And we wonder why we have obesity in this country. And for me, not every child is privileged. I didn't have sporty parents, but I was lucky that I did school sport. If I hadn't done school sport, I probably would never have had a go. And that wasn't because my parents were unwilling. It just wasn't in their psyche. And then you have some kids who come from deprived backgrounds who, unless they do it in school, their parents can't take them to sport. You can tell I'm a bit passionate about this.
Absolutely. We had exactly this conversation about half an hour downstairs in terms of low socioeconomic groups, and how if children haven't got parents that can transport them, just the very process of joining a club and taking them after school is a huge commitment.
It's a massive commitment, and that's sometimes it's not because they're not willing, they just can't do it, and we have to accept that. We can't make sport for the privileged few. We just can't do that. And it's actually one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this new role, because you have that incredible facility facilities that could open their doors to people who normally might not have an access to sport. But if it goes off the school, it's off the school curriculum. That's what so many people don't realise. It's not on the school curriculum. So again, there's a group of us that have been lobbying government very strongly around maths literacy and physical literacy, and the new school sports action plan. Let's hope that stays. With the change of government, let's hope that people push on with that. But you're absolutely right. Communication skills, leadership skills, and even if it isn't those at a top level, just sometimes just feeling good because they're out in the fresh air. It will be a disaster if if school sport goes. An absolute disaster.
I'm going to round up now and finish on more positive.
Good.
You've always been a fantastic mentor for women in sport, and I've seen that myself, of young people coming through and you mentoring within the sports sector. So if you had to give 2 or 3 pieces of advice now to young women, perhaps where you were 10, 15 years ago within the sector, what advice would you like to impart?
I think so many of them need to dump the imposter syndrome. We all have it. I had it terribly till we won that gold medal. It's really weird. Then it just flew away. But I think dump that. Don't assume you can't do something. Assume you can do it. And so many of the young women that I see, they just go into something thinking they're not going to be the best or they can't do it. And you don't have to be arrogant. So I think assume you can do stuff because you've probably done it. I always say to people I've mentored, go back over the last 90 days and write down the things that you've done that are really good, and it would be amazing how big that list is. And when you have those moments that you start doubting yourself, just start to write down some of the things that you've done that are really good. I love goal setting, and that's not necessarily about I'm going to hit this target, but around having some real key personal goals. And that might just be something as daft as picking up a phone and cold calling somebody because you want to go and meet them because you want to network with them. Set a goal of meeting 2 or 3 new people because they could help you in your career. And it's things like that, I think, more so than real structured mentoring. Most of the time when you're mentoring young women, it's a confidence thing.
Yeah.
It absolutely is a confidence thing, and making them believe that they're good enough to do it. But to keep their femininity about the way they do it, and don't try and be arrogant, or I'm not saying all blokes are arrogant, I'm using the 2 phrases completely separately.
Yeah.
Don't be arrogant and don't try and be blokey.
Yeah.
Celebrate who you are. I think those are the sorts of things that I talk to young women about.
Thanks so much to Jo for taking the time to meet with me and so openly share her thoughts. Netball will certainly miss the passion and professionalism she's brought to her role as CEO. We wish her well in her new position at the LLDC. If you've enjoyed this podcast, you can make sure you don't miss out on future episodes by subscribing to The Game Changers, and find out more about all my guests from seasons 1 and 2 at promotepr.com/gamechangers. Next week, I'm talking to broadcasting legend Claire Balding, OBE. As you can imagine, it was pretty daunting to interview the queen of the sports interview herself, but Claire was incredibly kind, sharing lots about her life, her work, and all she's doing to help increase the profile of women's sport in the media.
I grew up in a household where, without a shadow of a doubt, my father did not think that A, women could train racehorses, and B, he thought there were a lot of jobs that women couldn't do. Probably presenting Grandstand, which was the flagship sports programme at the time, would have been on his list of things that women couldn't do, and certainly not his own daughter. But his attitude changed because it had to, because I was going to go and do that.